Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that the product development team is proposing a new feature that leverages user-generated content in novel ways. While the team is confident in the technical implementation, there's a debate about the extent of the impact assessment required before launch. Which approach best balances innovation with responsible product stewardship? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment covering user privacy, data security, accessibility, potential for misuse, and compliance with all relevant regulations before proceeding with the feature launch. Option B. Perform a brief technical review to ensure the feature functions as intended, deferring any broader impact considerations until after the feature has been released and user feedback is gathered. Option C. Undertake a limited impact assessment focusing solely on the technical feasibility and immediate user experience, without a deep dive into privacy, security, or regulatory compliance. Option D. Proceed with the feature launch immediately, relying on the development team's informal understanding of potential risks, and address any issues that arise reactively. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment covering user privacy, data security, accessibility, potential for misuse, and compliance with all relevant regulations before proceeding with the feature launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a new feature with the potential long-term risks of inadequate impact assessment. The pressure to innovate and deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts, but neglecting a thorough impact assessment can result in significant unforeseen consequences, including regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and increased future remediation costs. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of assessment without unduly delaying essential product development. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured and comprehensive impact assessment process. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and risk management, which are implicitly expected within a regulated environment like the one governing technology companies. A thorough assessment ensures that potential negative impacts on users, data privacy, security, and compliance are identified and mitigated before deployment. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining customer trust and adhering to evolving regulatory landscapes, such as those concerning data protection and consumer rights, which are paramount for a company like Apple. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the feature launch without any formal impact assessment, relying solely on the development team's informal risk identification. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses established governance procedures and leaves the company vulnerable to unknown risks. It represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure by neglecting due diligence, potentially violating data privacy regulations, e.g., GDPR, CCPA if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, by not adequately assessing data handling implications and failing to uphold a duty of care to users. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial assessment that only considers immediate technical feasibility and ignores broader implications like user privacy, accessibility, or potential for misuse. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to meet the spirit and often the letter of regulatory requirements for comprehensive risk evaluation. It constitutes an ethical failure by prioritizing speed over user well-being, and a regulatory failure by not adequately addressing all mandated impact areas, such as those related to accessibility standards or consumer protection laws. A third incorrect approach is to postpone the impact assessment until after the feature has been launched and is in widespread use, planning to address any issues that arise reactively. This is professionally unacceptable as it shifts risk from a manageable pre-launch phase to a potentially chaotic post-launch environment. It represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure, as it demonstrates a disregard for proactive compliance and user safety, potentially leading to significant penalties and reputational damage if issues are discovered by regulators or the public. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to impact assessment. This involves defining clear criteria for when a full or partial assessment is required, based on the nature and potential impact of the change. A robust decision-making framework would include 1. Initial screening to identify potential risks. 2. Tailoring the assessment scope to the identified risks. 3. Engaging relevant stakeholders, legal, privacy, security, user experience throughout the process. 4. Documenting the assessment and mitigation plans. 5. Establishing a feedback loop for continuous monitoring and reassessment. This structured process ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly and in compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual network traffic originating from a specific employee's workstation during non-business hours, which deviates significantly from their typical usage. This traffic appears to be directed towards an external, unapproved cloud storage service. Option A. Immediately contact the employee to inquire about their network activity and the nature of the data being transferred. Option B. Escalate the anomaly to the IT security and compliance team for a formal investigation, providing them with the observed data and context, and await their directive before taking any further action. Option C. Log the anomaly but take no immediate action, assuming it is a benign personal use case that does not warrant further attention. Option D. Initiate a broader sweep of all employee network activity to identify similar patterns, regardless of the initial anomaly specificity. The correct answer is B. Escalate the anomaly to the IT security and compliance team for a formal investigation, providing them with the observed data and context, and await their directive before taking any further action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining system integrity and ensuring user privacy, especially when dealing with sensitive data that could be indicative of policy violations. The need for thorough investigation must be balanced against the potential for overreach or misinterpretation of data. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action without compromising either objective. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based investigation that respects established protocols and legal boundaries. By escalating the anomaly to a designated team with the authority and expertise to handle such matters, it ensures that the investigation is conducted by individuals trained in privacy regulations and internal policies. This approach aligns with the principle of least privilege, ensuring that only authorized personnel access and analyze sensitive information, thereby minimizing the risk of privacy breaches and unauthorized data use. It also adheres to the ethical obligation to investigate potential policy violations while simultaneously upholding the rights of individuals whose data is being reviewed. An incorrect approach that involves immediate direct user contact without prior internal review poses a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could violate data privacy regulations by prematurely disclosing that their activity has been flagged, potentially without sufficient cause or proper authorization. It also bypasses established internal investigation procedures, which are designed to ensure fairness and accuracy. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the anomaly due to its low perceived severity, represents an ethical failure to uphold the company's commitment to security and policy enforcement. This inaction could allow for ongoing policy violations, potentially leading to greater harm or security risks. A third incorrect approach, which involves broad, unfocused data collection beyond the scope of the initial anomaly, constitutes a privacy violation and a failure to adhere to data minimization principles. This indiscriminate data gathering increases the risk of exposing unrelated sensitive information and is often prohibited by privacy laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the anomaly and assessing its potential implications. This is followed by consulting relevant internal policies and regulatory guidelines to understand the permissible actions. The next step involves escalating the issue to the appropriate internal authority or team, ensuring that the investigation proceeds through established channels. Throughout the process, maintaining data confidentiality and respecting individual privacy rights are paramount. If there is any ambiguity, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is crucial. Question 3. The control framework reveals that a new feature is being developed that will collect and process user location data to provide personalized recommendations. The engineering team is eager to launch the feature quickly and has proposed proceeding with development, assuming that data will be anonymized before it is stored. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and ethical data handling practices? Option A. Assume that anonymizing the location data at the end of the development process will adequately address all privacy concerns and satisfy regulatory requirements. Option B. Perform a brief privacy review once the feature is substantially developed, making minor adjustments as needed to address any identified issues. Option C. Conduct a data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before development begins, and integrate privacy by design principles throughout the development lifecycle. Option D. Proceed with feature development, relying on the engineering team's understanding of data handling, and anonymize the data only after it has been collected and stored. The correct answer is C. Conduct a data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before development begins, and integrate privacy by design principles throughout the development lifecycle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to innovate and the need to adhere to strict data privacy regulations. The rapid development of new features, particularly those involving user data, creates a high-risk environment where missteps can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The pressure to release products quickly can tempt teams to bypass or minimize crucial compliance steps, requiring careful judgment to balance business objectives with regulatory obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes proactive risk assessment and integration of privacy by design principles throughout the product development lifecycle. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate data protection by design and by default. By conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) before development, the team can identify potential privacy risks early, implement appropriate safeguards, and ensure compliance with relevant laws. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of costly remediation efforts post-launch and demonstrates a commitment to ethical data handling, which is a cornerstone of professional practice and regulatory expectation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with feature development without a formal privacy assessment, relying solely on the engineering team's understanding of data handling. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a systematic evaluation of data protection risks, potentially leading to the collection or processing of data in ways that violate privacy laws. It represents an ethical failure by not prioritizing user privacy and a regulatory failure by neglecting mandated assessment procedures. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial privacy review only after the feature is largely developed. This is insufficient because it limits the ability to implement fundamental design changes that might be necessary to achieve compliance. It is reactive rather than proactive, increasing the risk of non-compliance and the potential for significant rework. This approach demonstrates a lack of commitment to privacy by design and a disregard for the spirit of data protection regulations. A third incorrect approach is to assume that anonymizing data at the end of the development cycle will suffice. While anonymization can be a useful technique, it is not a universal solution and may not address all privacy concerns, especially if the data can be re-identified or if the initial collection or processing itself is problematic. This approach risks overlooking other critical privacy considerations and may not satisfy the comprehensive requirements of data protection laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing compliance and ethical considerations from the outset of any project. This involves understanding the relevant regulatory landscape, engaging with legal and privacy experts early, and embedding privacy considerations into every stage of the development process. A structured decision-making framework would involve 1. Identifying the regulatory requirements applicable to the data being handled. 2. Assessing the potential privacy risks associated with the proposed feature. 3. Designing and implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate these risks. 4. Documenting all assessments and mitigation strategies. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating privacy measures as the product evolves. Question 4. Strategic planning requires a careful assessment of how knowledge gained from previous employment can be utilized in a new business venture, particularly when a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) is in place. Imagine you are leaving a technology company where you were privy to sensitive product development roadmaps and customer data. You are now planning to start a competing business. Which of the following actions best aligns with professional ethics and regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately begin developing products and marketing strategies based on all insights and information acquired during your previous employment, assuming that general industry knowledge is permissible to use. Option B. Consult with an independent legal professional specializing in intellectual property and employment law to review the specific terms of your NDA and advise on the permissible use of information before proceeding with any business activities. Option C. Rely on informal discussions with former colleagues and industry contacts to determine what information is considered proprietary and can be used in your new venture. Option D. Proceed with your new venture by broadly applying all learned methodologies and processes from your previous role, as long as you do not directly copy specific code or documents. Correct answer is A. Immediately begin developing products and marketing strategies based on all insights and information acquired during your previous employment, assuming that general industry knowledge is permissible to use. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the ethical and regulatory implications of using proprietary information obtained through a prior employment relationship. The core difficulty lies in balancing the desire to leverage acquired knowledge for a new venture against the legal and ethical obligations of confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements, NDA, signed with a former employer. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of intellectual property law, contractual obligations, and professional ethics to avoid potential litigation and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes seeking independent legal counsel to review the NDA and assess the scope of proprietary information. This is best professional practice because it ensures compliance with contractual obligations and relevant laws governing intellectual property and confidentiality. Legally sound advice provides a clear framework for distinguishing between general industry knowledge and specific, protected information, thereby mitigating the risk of infringement. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to honoring commitments made to a former employer and maintaining professional integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the new venture by broadly applying all knowledge gained from the previous role without a thorough review. This is professionally unacceptable, as it carries a high risk of violating the NDA and potentially infringing on the former employer's intellectual property rights. Such an action could lead to legal disputes, financial penalties, and severe damage to the individual's professional reputation. It demonstrates a disregard for contractual commitments and ethical responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any information not explicitly marked as confidential is free to use. This is a flawed assumption, as NDAs often cover a broader range of information, including trade secrets and business strategies, regardless of explicit marking. Relying on this assumption can lead to unintentional breaches of confidentiality, resulting in legal repercussions and ethical censure. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the advice of colleagues or mentors who may not have a comprehensive understanding of the specific legal nuances of the NDA or the relevant jurisdiction's laws. While well-intentioned, this informal advice can be legally insufficient and ethically precarious, exposing the individual to significant risks without adequate protection. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly review all relevant contractual agreements, such as NDAs and employment contracts. Second, identify and categorize all information gained from the previous role, distinguishing between general industry knowledge and specific proprietary data. Third, seek qualified legal counsel to interpret the agreements and advise on permissible uses of information. Fourth, document all steps taken to ensure compliance and ethical conduct. This systematic approach prioritizes legal and ethical adherence, safeguarding both the individual and their new venture. Question 5. The control framework reveals that a new AI-powered feature designed to personalize user experiences is nearing its development deadline. While the feature promises significant user engagement benefits, preliminary internal reviews have flagged potential concerns regarding the collection and processing of sensitive user data, which may not be fully aligned with the strictest interpretations of data privacy regulations applicable to Apple's operations. The development team is pushing to release the feature to meet market demands, suggesting that any control gaps can be addressed through post-launch updates. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation while adhering to regulatory and ethical standards? Option A. Launch the AI feature with a disclaimer informing users that their data may be collected and processed in ways that are not fully compliant with all regulations, but that efforts are being made to rectify this. Option B. Proceed with the launch of the AI feature as planned, relying on the development team's assurance that any data privacy issues will be addressed through subsequent software updates, and focus on marketing the innovative aspects of the feature. Option C. Delegate the decision of whether to launch to a newly formed AI ethics committee, allowing them to review the feature in isolation from the development timeline and make a recommendation without immediate pressure to consider market impact. Option D. Delay the launch of the AI feature until a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment is completed, all identified control gaps are remediated, and the feature is fully compliant with all applicable regulations, even if this means missing the initial market window. The correct answer is D. Delay the launch of the AI feature until a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment is completed, all identified control gaps are remediated, and the feature is fully compliant with all applicable regulations, even if this means missing the initial market window. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to innovate and the imperative to maintain robust internal controls, especially within a company like Apple that prioritizes user privacy and data security. The rapid pace of technological development in AI necessitates agile responses, but this must be balanced against the potential for unintended consequences and regulatory noncompliance. The core challenge lies in ensuring that new AI features are developed and deployed in a manner that is both compliant with existing regulations and ethically sound, without stifling innovation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and integrated risk management strategy. This involves embedding control considerations from the earliest stages of AI development, conducting thorough impact assessments, and establishing clear governance structures. This aligns with best practices in regulatory compliance and ethical AI development, ensuring that potential risks are identified and mitigated before they manifest. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation, which is crucial for maintaining user trust and avoiding regulatory penalties. This approach reflects a deep understanding of the Apple hiring assessment tests, likely focus on compliance, risk management, and ethical considerations in technology development. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach might involve prioritizing speed to market over comprehensive control implementation. This would be a regulatory failure, as it risks deploying AI features that could inadvertently violate data privacy laws, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, depending on the exam's specified jurisdiction, or introduce biases that lead to discriminatory outcomes, which are often prohibited by law and ethical guidelines. It also represents an ethical failure by potentially exposing users to unforeseen risks. Another incorrect approach could be to delegate all control responsibilities to a separate, siloed compliance team without adequate integration into the development lifecycle. This creates a disconnect, where developers might not fully understand or prioritize control requirements, leading to features that are difficult or impossible to bring into compliance later. This is a failure of effective internal control design and implementation, potentially leading to systemic weaknesses and regulatory breaches. A third incorrect approach might be to rely solely on post-deployment monitoring and remediation. While monitoring is essential, a purely reactive stance is insufficient for complex AI systems. It fails to address the proactive nature of risk management required by many regulatory frameworks and ethical standards, which demand foresight and preventative measures. This can lead to significant reputational damage and financial penalties if a critical issue is discovered only after widespread deployment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a control-by-design mindset. This involves a continuous cycle of risk assessment, control design, implementation, monitoring, and review integrated directly into the product development lifecycle. Key steps include 1. Early identification of potential risks and regulatory touchpoints. 2. Cross-functional collaboration between development, legal, compliance, and privacy teams. 3. Development of clear policies and procedures for AI development and deployment. 4. Robust testing and validation, including bias detection and privacy impact assessments. 5. Ongoing monitoring and adaptation to evolving regulatory landscapes and technological advancements. This structured approach ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly, with a strong foundation of compliance and ethical integrity. Question 6. Assessment of the marketing strategy for a new smart home device that emphasizes its revolutionary energy-saving capabilities without providing specific, quantifiable data or independent third-party verification for these claims in its initial promotional materials. Option A. Focus the marketing solely on the device's innovative design and user interface, omitting any specific claims about energy efficiency until sufficient data is available. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign as planned, as the term revolutionary is subjective and aspirational, and detailed data will be provided in later product documentation. Option C. Halt the marketing campaign and conduct rigorous testing to gather specific, quantifiable data on the device's energy savings, and obtain independent third-party certification to substantiate all claims before launching any promotional materials. Option D. Modify the marketing materials to include a disclaimer stating that energy savings may vary and are not guaranteed, while still using the revolutionary descriptor. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the marketing campaign as planned, as the term revolutionary is subjective and aspirational, and detailed data will be provided in later product documentation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to innovate and expand its product offerings and the regulatory obligation to ensure that such innovations do not mislead consumers or create unfair market advantages. The core of the challenge lies in balancing aggressive business objectives with the stringent requirements of consumer protection laws and ethical marketing practices. Careful judgment is required to navigate the gray areas of product claims and to ensure that all marketing materials are accurate, substantiated, and do not exploit potential vulnerabilities in consumer understanding. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and substantiation, aligning with the fundamental principles of consumer protection regulations. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of laws that prohibit deceptive advertising and require that all product claims be truthful and backed by evidence. This approach fosters consumer trust, mitigates legal and reputational risks, and upholds ethical marketing standards. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible business conduct, which is paramount in maintaining long-term customer loyalty and market standing. An incorrect approach that relies on vague or aspirational language without concrete evidence to support it fails to meet the regulatory standard for truthfulness in advertising. This can lead to accusations of deceptive practices, potentially resulting in regulatory fines, product recalls, and significant damage to the company's brand reputation. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on the perceived competitive advantage without independently verifying the claim's accuracy ignores the ethical imperative to avoid misleading the public. This can create an uneven playing field and erode consumer confidence in the market as a whole. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough review of marketing claims risks releasing materials that are non-compliant, leading to immediate regulatory scrutiny and potential legal action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable consumer protection laws and advertising standards. This involves proactive engagement with legal and compliance teams to review all marketing materials and product claims. The framework should include a robust substantiation process, ensuring that all claims are supported by credible and verifiable evidence before dissemination. Furthermore, it necessitates a continuous monitoring and review process to address any emerging issues or changes in regulatory interpretation. Ethical considerations should be integrated at every stage, promoting a culture of honesty and integrity in all external communications. Question 7. Comparative studies suggest that innovative technology development often outpaces the establishment of clear regulatory guidelines. Imagine you are part of a team developing a new feature for a consumer-facing application that involves collecting user interaction data to personalize the experience. The team is eager to launch quickly and believes that the data collected is not sensitive. However, there is no explicit user consent mechanism for this specific data collection, and the existing privacy policy is general. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation while adhering to best professional practices and potential regulatory expectations? Option A. Collect the data as planned, but implement a robust post-collection anonymization process, believing that this mitigates privacy risks sufficiently without requiring upfront user consent for the collection itself. Option B. Immediately halt the feature's deployment and initiate a comprehensive review of data collection practices, focusing on data minimization, anonymization where feasible, and developing a clear, user-friendly consent mechanism specifically for this feature before proceeding. Option C. Modify the existing privacy policy to broadly encompass this type of data collection, making it more difficult for users to find and understand, and then launch the feature, assuming users will not scrutinize the policy in detail. Option D. Proceed with the feature launch, relying on the existing general privacy policy and assuming user consent by their continued use of the application, while planning to address any potential privacy concerns reactively. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the feature's deployment and initiate a comprehensive review of data collection practices, focusing on data minimization, anonymization where feasible, and developing a clear, user-friendly consent mechanism specifically for this feature before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a company's desire to innovate and the regulatory imperative to protect consumer data privacy. The need to balance these competing interests requires careful judgment, a thorough understanding of applicable regulations, and a commitment to ethical data handling practices. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes compliance with the specified regulatory framework, which in this case is the Apple Hiring Assessment Test's implicit adherence to U.S. data privacy laws, e.g., CCPA, COPPA, and general FTC guidelines regarding deceptive practices. This approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with privacy considerations from the outset of product development. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship by seeking to minimize data collection, anonymize data where possible, and obtain explicit consent for any necessary data usage. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are cornerstones of modern privacy regulations. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with data collection without a clear privacy policy or user consent would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate principles of transparency and informed consent, potentially leading to violations of laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which grants consumers rights regarding their personal information. Another incorrect approach, such as collecting data broadly, and then attempting to anonymize it later without a defined strategy or user notification, risks inadequate anonymization, leading to potential re-identification and subsequent privacy breaches, which is also a regulatory and ethical failing. Finally, an approach that relies on vague terms of service to justify broad data collection without specific user understanding or opt-in mechanisms would be ethically questionable and likely fall short of regulatory expectations for clear and conspicuous notice. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stage approach. 1. Regulatory assessment. Identify all applicable data privacy laws and regulations relevant to the product and target audience. 2. Risk identification. Analyze potential privacy risks associated with data collection, storage, and usage. 3. Mitigation strategy development. Design technical and procedural safeguards to minimize identified risks, including data minimization, anonymization, and robust security measures. 4. Transparency and consent. Develop clear, concise, and easily accessible privacy policies and consent mechanisms that inform users about data practices and allow them to make informed choices. 5. Legal and privacy review. Engage legal counsel and privacy experts to review all data handling practices and ensure compliance. 6. Ongoing monitoring. Establish processes for continuous monitoring and adaptation of data privacy practices in response to evolving regulations and technologies. Question 8. To address the challenge of integrating a new AI-powered personalization feature into a global consumer application while adhering to strict data privacy regulations, which of the following development strategies best balances innovation with user protection and legal compliance? Option A. Implement the feature using the most advanced AI algorithms, collecting as much user interaction data as possible to refine personalization, and providing a general privacy policy update to users. Option B. Develop the feature with minimal user data collection, limiting its personalization capabilities significantly, and assume that existing user agreements cover the necessary data processing for this new functionality. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate privacy risks. Implement data minimization techniques by collecting only essential data for the feature's core function, and obtain explicit, granular consent from users for any additional data processing. Option D. Prioritize rapid feature deployment to gain a competitive advantage, relying on the assumption that the feature's benefits to users will outweigh any minor privacy concerns, and address any potential regulatory issues post-launch. The correct answer is A. Implement the feature using the most advanced AI algorithms, collecting as much user interaction data as possible to refine personalization, and providing a general privacy policy update to users. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge in navigating the ethical and regulatory landscape of data privacy when developing a new feature for a widely used consumer product. The core difficulty lies in balancing innovation and user experience with the stringent requirements of data protection laws, specifically the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, as it applies to Apple's operations and its global user base. Ensuring compliance requires a proactive and comprehensive approach to data minimization, purpose limitation, and user consent, which can impact design choices and feature functionality. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes privacy by design and by default, aligning with the fundamental principles of GDPR. This involves conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate risks before development commences. It also emphasizes obtaining explicit, informed consent for any data processing beyond what is strictly necessary for the core functionality of the service, and implementing robust data minimization techniques. This proactive stance not only ensures legal compliance, but also builds user trust and protects the company from significant fines and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on feature functionality without adequately considering data privacy implications would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to the collection of excessive personal data, violating the principle of data minimization. Failing to obtain proper consent for data processing would breach the requirements for lawful processing under GDPR. Another incorrect approach that relies on vague or bundled consent mechanisms would be ethically questionable and legally insufficient, as GDPR mandates clear, specific, and freely given consent. Such approaches risk noncompliance, leading to potential investigations, substantial penalties, and erosion of user confidence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary team including legal counsel, privacy officers, and engineering leads from the outset of any new product development or feature enhancement. This team should systematically assess potential data privacy risks, consult relevant regulatory guidance, and integrate privacy considerations into every stage of the development lifecycle. Prioritizing user rights and regulatory compliance over expediency is paramount. Question 9. The assessment process reveals a candidate's proposed strategy for collecting user interaction data to improve Apple's software features. The candidate suggests collecting a broad range of telemetry data, including app usage patterns, device performance metrics, and user interface navigation, with the intention of analyzing this data to identify areas for enhancement. The candidate's proposal also mentions anonymizing the data before storage. Which of the following approaches best aligns with robust data privacy principles and regulatory expectations for a company like Apple? Option A. Implement a system that collects detailed user interaction data, clearly informs users about the types of data collected and their intended use for product improvement, and provides granular options for users to opt in or opt out of specific data collection categories, while ensuring strong anonymization and security protocols. Option B. Collect all available telemetry data, including sensitive usage patterns, and rely on a general statement in the privacy policy that data may be used for product improvement, assuming anonymization is sufficient to protect user privacy. Option C. Collect detailed user interaction data and store it without explicit consent, arguing that it is necessary for competitive product development and that anonymization will be performed later. Option D. Collect only aggregated, anonymized data that cannot be linked back to individual users, even if this limits the granularity of insights for product improvement. The correct answer is A. Implement a system that collects detailed user interaction data, clearly informs users about the types of data collected, and their intended use for product improvement, and provides granular options for users to opt in or opt out of specific data collection categories, while ensuring strong anonymization and security protocols. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a candidate's understanding of data privacy principles, a critical area for any technology company like Apple. The challenge lies in balancing the collection of user data for product improvement with the imperative to protect individual privacy rights. This scenario requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory frameworks governing data handling and ethical considerations. The correct approach demonstrates a commitment to privacy by design and adherence to the principle of data minimization. It prioritizes obtaining explicit consent for data collection and clearly outlines how the data will be used and protected, aligning with best practices in data privacy regulations. This proactive stance ensures compliance and builds user trust, which is paramount in the technology sector. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing data collection for potential future use, without clear consent or defined purpose, violates fundamental data privacy principles. This could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of user confidence. Another incorrect approach that involves anonymizing data without considering the potential for re-identification or failing to implement robust security measures also poses significant risks. Such actions disregard the ongoing responsibility to protect user information, even after anonymization, and can result in breaches and legal liabilities. A third incorrect approach that relies on vague or boilerplate privacy policies fails to provide users with meaningful transparency and control, undermining the ethical obligation to inform individuals about how their data is handled. Professionals should approach data handling by first identifying the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data being collected and the jurisdictions involved. They should then adopt a privacy-first mindset, designing systems and processes that inherently protect user data. This involves conducting thorough data privacy impact assessments, implementing robust security controls, and ensuring transparent communication with users about data practices. The decision-making process should always prioritize user rights and regulatory compliance over potential business gains derived from unchecked data collection. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that in the development of new consumer electronics, a critical tension often arises between the drive for rapid innovation and the imperative to ensure product safety and compliance with regulatory standards. Considering the Apple hiring assessment tests focus on ethical and regulatory adherence, which of the following approaches best navigates this tension while upholding professional responsibility? Option A. Implementing a phased approach to product development, where rigorous safety testing and regulatory review are integrated into each development milestone, with a commitment to delaying launch if critical safety concerns are identified. Option B. Focusing primarily on market competitiveness and user experience, with regulatory compliance being addressed as a secondary concern only when explicitly mandated by regulatory bodies. Option C. Adopting a flexible interpretation of regulatory guidelines, assuming that minor deviations are acceptable as long as the product offers significant technological advancements. Option D. Expediting the product development cycle by conducting minimal, internal safety checks and relying on post-launch user feedback to identify and address any potential issues. The correct answer is A. Implementing a phased approach to product development where rigorous safety testing and regulatory review are integrated into each development milestone, with a commitment to delaying launch if critical safety concerns are identified. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid product development and the regulatory imperative to ensure the safety and efficacy of new technologies. The pressure to innovate quickly can lead to shortcuts in testing or a downplaying of potential risks, which directly contravenes the principles of responsible product stewardship and consumer protection. Navigating this requires a delicate balance between business objectives and ethical obligations, demanding a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment process that integrates regulatory compliance from the outset of product development. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation, where potential harms are identified, evaluated, and mitigated before a product reaches the market. By prioritizing rigorous testing, transparent documentation, and adherence to established safety standards. This approach upholds the company's ethical duty to its users and demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance, thereby minimizing legal and reputational risks. This is best professional practice as it embeds a culture of safety and compliance, rather than treating it as an afterthought. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing market launch speed over thorough safety validation. This directly violates regulatory frameworks that mandate pre-market assessment of product safety and efficacy. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for consumer well-being, potentially exposing users to unforeseen risks. This failure can lead to significant legal penalties, product recalls, and severe damage to brand reputation. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on internal testing without independent verification or adherence to industry-recognized standards. This approach is problematic because it lacks the objectivity and rigor required by regulatory bodies. It creates a significant risk of bias in the assessment process and fails to meet the due diligence expectations of regulators. Ethically, it suggests a lack of commitment to genuine product safety and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent regulatory oversight. A third incorrect approach is to interpret regulatory guidelines loosely, assuming that minor deviations are acceptable in the pursuit of innovation. This is a dangerous assumption that can lead to significant noncompliance. Regulatory frameworks are designed with specific requirements for a reason, and any deviation, however small, can have serious consequences. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to compromise on safety standards for business expediency. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should adopt a framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding all applicable regulations and guidelines. 2. Integrating risk assessment and mitigation strategies into every stage of the product lifecycle, from conception to post-market surveillance. 3. Fostering open communication channels between development, legal, and compliance teams. 4. Seeking expert advice when navigating complex or ambiguous regulatory requirements. 5. Maintaining detailed and accurate documentation of all processes, decisions, and testing results. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and ethically, safeguarding both the company and its users. Question 11. System analysis indicates that a new feature within an Apple product is designed to collect user interaction data to improve its functionality. Before widespread deployment, the product team is debating the extent to which they need to conduct a formal privacy impact assessment and seek explicit user consent for this specific data collection, given the feature's novel data usage patterns. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action from a regulatory and ethical standpoint for Apple? Option A. Prioritize the feature's launch timeline and collect data, with a plan to address any potential privacy concerns or regulatory requirements after the feature has been released to users. Option B. Proceed with data collection based on a general understanding of existing Apple privacy policies, assuming that the data collected is not overly sensitive and can be anonymized later. Option C. Rely on the engineering team's technical understanding of data handling to implement security measures, without formal consultation with legal or privacy experts, as the data is intended for internal improvement. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment and obtain explicit, informed user consent for the specific data being collected by the new feature, ensuring alignment with Apple's privacy policies and relevant U.S. federal data protection regulations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment and obtain explicit, informed user consent for the specific data being collected by the new feature, ensuring alignment with Apple's privacy policies and relevant U.S. federal data protection regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Apple's internal policies and potentially relevant U.S. federal regulations concerning data privacy and security, specifically in the context of handling sensitive customer information collected through a new feature. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to innovate and gather user feedback with the imperative to protect user data and comply with legal and ethical obligations. A misstep could lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and erosion of customer trust. The need for careful judgment arises from the ambiguity that can exist between policy guidelines and the practical implementation of new technologies. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Apple's established data privacy policies, relevant U.S. federal laws such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, if applicable to the data collected, and any specific internal guidelines for new feature development. This approach prioritizes a proactive, compliance-first mindset. It ensures that any data collection is conducted with explicit user consent, data minimization principles are applied, and robust security measures are in place before the feature is rolled out. This aligns with Apple's stated commitment to user privacy and security, and adheres to regulatory requirements by treating customer data with the utmost care and transparency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with data collection based on a broad interpretation of existing, potentially outdated, policies without specific validation for the new feature's data handling. This risks overlooking new privacy concerns or failing to meet evolving regulatory standards, leading to potential violations of data protection laws and ethical breaches. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize feature launch speed over comprehensive data privacy assessment, assuming that any issues can be addressed post-launch. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it demonstrates a disregard for user privacy and a reactive rather than proactive approach to compliance. It exposes Apple to substantial legal risks and can severely damage its reputation. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the engineering team's understanding of data handling without consulting legal and privacy experts. This can lead to blind spots regarding legal obligations and best practices, potentially resulting in unintentional noncompliance and data security vulnerabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the core issue, the responsible handling of customer data for a new feature. This involves consulting all relevant internal policies, legal counsel, and privacy officers. A risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential privacy and security vulnerabilities. Best practices dictate a phased approach, starting with a privacy impact assessment, followed by the implementation of necessary safeguards and obtaining explicit user consent before any data collection. Continuous monitoring and adherence to evolving regulations are also crucial. This systematic process ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly and ethically, safeguarding both the company and its users. Question 12. Consider a scenario where a technology company is developing a novel financial product that leverages artificial intelligence for personalized investment recommendations. The product has the potential to significantly disrupt the market, and the company is eager to launch it quickly to gain a competitive advantage. However, the product's AI algorithms are complex, and their decision-making processes are not always easily interpretable. The company's internal legal and compliance teams have raised concerns about potential regulatory scrutiny regarding disclosure requirements and the suitability of recommendations to different investor profiles. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation in compliance with financial regulatory frameworks? Option A. Launch the product with minimal regulatory engagement, focusing on marketing the innovative aspects of the AI and relying on the inherent complexity of the technology to deter detailed regulatory inquiry. Option B. Engage with relevant financial regulatory bodies early in the development process to understand their expectations, seek guidance on disclosure requirements for complex AI, and ensure the product's design and marketing align with regulatory principles before a public launch. Option C. Proceed with the launch after a thorough internal review of the AI's performance, and a disclaimer stating that the recommendations are not guaranteed, and investors should conduct their own due diligence. Option D. Halt the product development until a clear and universally accepted regulatory framework for AI-driven financial products is established, even if this means delaying the launch indefinitely. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the launch after a thorough internal review of the AI's performance, and a disclaimer stating that the recommendations are not guaranteed, and investors should conduct their own due diligence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid innovation and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and market integrity. The need to balance speed with compliance requires a nuanced understanding of the regulatory framework governing financial product development and disclosure. Careful judgment is essential to avoid missteps that could lead to significant legal and reputational damage. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework. Specifically, it ensures that all new financial products undergo rigorous internal review and external regulatory approval processes before being offered to the public. This aligns with the principles of investor protection, market fairness, and transparency mandated by financial regulations. By proactively engaging with regulators and ensuring full compliance, the company mitigates risks and builds trust with its stakeholders. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately addresses regulatory requirements would constitute a failure to uphold fiduciary duties and a violation of securities laws. Such an approach risks misleading investors, creating an uneven playing field, and exposing the company to severe penalties, including fines, sanctions, and potential litigation. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on internal assessments without seeking necessary external validation or approvals ignores the fundamental principle that regulatory bodies exist to provide an independent oversight mechanism. This oversight is critical for ensuring that products are not only innovative, but also safe and compliant. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough risk assessment and disclosure would be ethically unsound and legally precarious, as it could lead to the introduction of products with unforeseen risks that are not adequately communicated to investors. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stage approach. First, thoroughly understand the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the product or service being developed. Second, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential compliance gaps and ethical considerations. Third, engage relevant internal stakeholders, including legal, compliance, and product development teams, to ensure a unified understanding and strategy. Fourth, proactively consult with regulatory bodies where appropriate to seek clarification or pre-approval. Finally, implement robust internal controls and ongoing monitoring to ensure continued compliance post-launch. Question 13. The investigation demonstrates that a hiring manager tasked with assessing candidates for a new role at Apple has received a candidate's resume and a standardized assessment score. The manager is also aware of a personal acquaintance who has recommended this candidate and has a strong initial impression of the candidate's suitability based on a brief informal chat. The manager is considering how to proceed with the evaluation. Option A. Systematically evaluate the candidate's resume and assessment score against the defined job requirements and the provided scoring rubric, ensuring all interviewers follow the standardized guide. Option B. Prioritize the candidate for the role based on the personal recommendation and the initial positive impression, adjusting the interview questions to confirm these assumptions. Option C. Share the candidate's personal contact information and resume details with other team members to gather their informal opinions before the formal interview. Option D. Focus the formal interview on probing for personal anecdotes and unrelated experiences that might further support the initial positive impression, rather than strictly adhering to the job-related questions. Correct answer is A. Systematically evaluate the candidate's resume and assessment score against the defined job requirements and the provided scoring rubric, ensuring all interviewers follow the standardized guide. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Apple's internal hiring policies, specifically concerning the handling of candidate data and the potential for bias in the assessment process. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient and effective hiring with the imperative to uphold fairness, data privacy, and compliance with internal guidelines. The hiring manager must exercise careful judgment to ensure that the assessment process is objective and that candidate information is treated with appropriate confidentiality. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the candidate's qualifications against the defined role requirements, utilizing the structured interview guide and scoring rubric provided by Apple. This method ensures objectivity by standardizing the evaluation criteria for all candidates, thereby minimizing the risk of unconscious bias. It aligns with best professional practice by adhering to established internal procedures designed to promote fair and equitable hiring. This approach upholds ethical principles by treating all candidates impartially and respecting the integrity of the assessment process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing a candidate based on a personal connection or a perceived gut feeling, without a systematic evaluation against the job criteria. This introduces subjectivity and potential bias, violating Apple's commitment to merit-based hiring and potentially leading to discriminatory practices. It fails to adhere to internal policy by circumventing the established assessment framework. Another incorrect approach is to share specific details about one candidate's performance or personal information with other interviewers or stakeholders outside of the designated hiring team without explicit consent or a legitimate business need. This breaches data privacy principles and Apple's internal guidelines on confidential information, potentially creating an unfair advantage or disadvantage for the candidate and undermining trust in the hiring process. A further incorrect approach is to deviate from the standardized interview questions and scoring rubric to probe for information that is not directly relevant to the job requirements, especially if this deviation is applied inconsistently across candidates. This can lead to irrelevant comparisons, introduce bias, and may inadvertently uncover protected characteristics, creating legal and ethical risks. It demonstrates a lack of adherence to the structured assessment process designed to ensure fairness. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and ethical guidelines. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing all relevant internal policies and procedures, e.g., hiring guidelines, data privacy policies. 2. Applying objective criteria consistently to all candidates. 3. Maintaining strict confidentiality of candidate information. 4. Seeking clarification or guidance from HR or legal departments when faced with ambiguous situations or potential policy conflicts. 5. Documenting all assessment decisions and the rationale behind them to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 14. Upon reviewing the proposed integration of a new AI-powered personalization feature into the Apple Music app, which will analyze user listening habits to suggest new music, the product development team has raised concerns about the potential privacy implications of the data collected and processed. The team is eager to launch the feature quickly to capitalize on market trends. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the new feature before proceeding with integration. Option B. Rely on the engineering team's technical understanding of data processing to ensure that the feature is implemented in a privacy-preserving manner without formal assessment. Option C. Proceed with the integration of the AI feature, assuming that existing data handling policies are sufficient and that user consent for general data usage covers this new functionality. Option D. Delay the launch of the AI feature indefinitely until a perfect, risk-free method of data analysis is developed, even if it means missing market opportunities. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the new feature before proceeding with integration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid product development and the regulatory imperative to ensure data privacy and security. The need to integrate new features while adhering to strict data handling protocols requires careful judgment to balance innovation with compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, risk-based assessment of the new feature's impact on user data before deployment. This aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and security by design, which are fundamental to data protection regulations. By conducting a data protection impact assessment (DPIA), the team demonstrates a proactive commitment to identifying and mitigating potential privacy risks, ensuring that user data is handled responsibly and in accordance with legal requirements. This approach fosters trust with users and avoids potential legal repercussions. An incorrect approach that proceeds with integration without a proper assessment fails to uphold the duty of care owed to users regarding their personal data. This could lead to inadvertent breaches of privacy, noncompliance with data protection laws, e.g., by collecting or processing data beyond what is necessary or without adequate security measures, and significant reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on the engineering team's assumptions about data handling overlooks the specialized knowledge required for privacy compliance and the potential for unforeseen risks. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the regulatory framework governing data protection. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential regulatory implications of any new initiative. This involves consulting relevant legal and compliance teams early in the development lifecycle. When dealing with user data, a risk assessment, such as a DPIA, should be a mandatory step to understand and address potential privacy impacts. This proactive, compliance-first mindset ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly and ethically, minimizing the likelihood of regulatory violations and maintaining user trust. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal a potential security vulnerability in a newly developed feature that could expose user data under specific, albeit uncommon, circumstances. The release timeline is aggressive, and the engineering team is under pressure to launch the feature to meet market demand. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Implement a quick, superficial patch to address the immediate symptom without investigating the root cause, and release the feature to meet the deadline. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the scope and impact of the vulnerability, develop a targeted fix, and validate its effectiveness before proceeding with the release. Option C. Delay the release indefinitely until a perfect, risk-free solution can be implemented, even if it means missing the market window. Option D. Proceed with the release as scheduled, assuming the vulnerability is unlikely to be exploited given its specific triggering conditions, and address it in a future update if issues arise. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the scope and impact of the vulnerability, develop a targeted fix, and validate its effectiveness before proceeding with the release. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires balancing the need for rapid product development and market responsiveness with the fundamental obligation to ensure product safety and compliance. The pressure to innovate and release new features quickly can create tension with the rigorous testing and validation processes necessary to identify and mitigate potential risks. Professionals must exercise sound judgment to avoid compromising quality for speed. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing a thorough, risk-based assessment before proceeding with a broad rollout. This aligns with regulatory expectations for product stewardship and consumer protection. By identifying potential vulnerabilities and implementing targeted fixes, the team upholds its ethical duty to deliver safe and reliable products. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of widespread issues, reputational damage, and potential regulatory scrutiny. It reflects a commitment to a robust quality management system, a core tenet of responsible product development. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the release without addressing the identified issues. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It disregards the potential harm to users and violates the implicit trust consumers place in the company to provide safe products. Such an action could lead to severe consequences, including product recalls, fines, lawsuits, and irreparable damage to the brand's reputation. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for established quality control protocols. Another incorrect approach is to delay the release indefinitely without a clear plan to resolve the issues. While caution is important, an indefinite delay without a defined remediation strategy can also be problematic. It can lead to missed market opportunities, competitive disadvantages, and internal frustration. Ethically, it can be seen as a failure to adequately resource and prioritize the resolution of identified problems, potentially indicating a lack of commitment to product quality. From a regulatory perspective, while not directly violating a specific rule, it can signal an inefficient or ineffective quality management system. A third incorrect approach is to implement a superficial fix without understanding the root cause of the problem. This is a dangerous shortcut that fails to address the underlying systemic issues. It increases the risk of the problem recurring or manifesting in different ways, potentially leading to more severe consequences down the line. This approach demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and a failure to adhere to best practices in problem-solving and root cause analysis, which are critical for maintaining product integrity and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-aware decision-making process. This involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting the identified issue. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment to understand the potential impact on users and the business. 3. Developing a clear remediation plan with defined timelines and responsibilities. 4. Implementing and validating the fix. 5. Communicating transparently with stakeholders about the issue and the resolution. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and compliant with regulatory requirements, ultimately safeguarding both the company and its customers. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a new feature for the Apple Watch is being developed that will collect biometric data for enhanced fitness tracking. The development team is under pressure to meet an aggressive launch deadline. They have proposed implementing the feature with a brief, general statement in the user agreement about data collection for service improvement, without a detailed explanation of the specific types of biometric data collected or how it will be stored and secured. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance and ethical data handling? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of Apple's existing privacy policies and relevant data protection regulations to determine specific requirements for collecting and handling sensitive biometric data before proceeding with the feature's implementation. Option B. Implement the feature with a more detailed but still nonspecific privacy notice that broadly outlines data usage categories without detailing the exact biometric data types or security measures. Option C. Proceed with the feature's development and launch, relying on the general statement in the user agreement to cover data collection and address any specific privacy concerns that arise post-launch. Option D. Focus solely on the technical implementation of the feature to meet the deadline, assuming that any necessary privacy considerations can be retroactively addressed by the legal team. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of Apple's existing privacy policies and relevant data protection regulations to determine specific requirements for collecting and handling sensitive biometric data before proceeding with the feature's implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid product development and the regulatory imperative to ensure data privacy and security. The pressure to release a new feature quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise user trust and violate established legal frameworks. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation with compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough review of existing privacy policies and relevant regulations before proceeding with feature implementation. This proactive stance ensures that the new feature is designed and deployed in a manner that is compliant with all applicable laws, such as those governing data collection, storage, and user consent. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical data handling and builds user trust by respecting their privacy rights. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, which are often mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the feature without a comprehensive privacy review would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory violations, such as breaches of data protection laws, resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and potential legal action. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for user privacy and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to protect sensitive information. Another incorrect approach, which might involve implementing the feature with a vague or superficial privacy notice, also fails to meet regulatory and ethical standards. This approach is deceptive and does not provide users with clear, actionable information about how their data will be used, undermining informed consent. It also leaves the company vulnerable to accusations of misleading users and violating transparency requirements. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes identifying potential privacy and security risks associated with the new feature, consulting with legal and compliance teams to understand relevant regulatory obligations, and developing mitigation strategies. Prioritizing user privacy and data protection throughout the development lifecycle, rather than as an afterthought, is crucial. This involves embedding privacy considerations from the initial design phase and conducting regular audits to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that a product development team has made a significant breakthrough that could substantially impact the company's market valuation. The information is still in its early stages, and the full implications are not yet understood, but it is highly likely to be material. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the team lead to take? Option A. Inform senior management about the breakthrough, emphasizing its potential impact, but deferring detailed regulatory considerations to them. Option B. Wait until the full impact of the breakthrough is quantified and understood before informing any internal stakeholders, including legal and compliance. Option C. Share the preliminary findings with all members of the product development team and other relevant internal departments to foster collaboration and accelerate further research. Option D. Immediately consult with the company's legal and compliance departments to determine the nature of the information and the appropriate disclosure protocols. The correct answer is D. Immediately consult with the company's legal and compliance departments to determine the nature of the information and the appropriate disclosure protocols. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for timely and accurate information dissemination with the regulatory obligation to prevent market abuse. The challenge lies in identifying the precise point at which information becomes inside information and the subsequent responsibilities that arise. Careful judgment is required to avoid both premature disclosure, which could be disruptive, and delayed disclosure, which could violate regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to regulatory frameworks designed to ensure market integrity. By seeking clarification from the legal and compliance departments, the individual demonstrates a commitment to understanding and applying the relevant regulations before taking any action. This proactive step ensures that any communication is compliant, accurate, and does not inadvertently lead to market manipulation or unfair advantage. This aligns with the core principles of regulatory compliance, which emphasize diligence, caution, and seeking expert guidance when in doubt. An incorrect approach of immediately disclosing the preliminary finding to a wider internal audience without proper vetting or legal review fails to acknowledge the potential for this information to be considered inside information. This could lead to a breach of regulations, prohibiting the disclosure of inside information to unauthorized persons, potentially resulting in insider trading, if that information is subsequently acted upon by recipients. Another incorrect approach of waiting for absolute certainty and comprehensive data before informing anyone, including the legal and compliance teams, is also professionally unacceptable. This delay could mean that market-sensitive information is not being managed appropriately, and if the information is indeed material and non-public, the delay in establishing controls around its dissemination could itself be a regulatory failure. It also misses the opportunity for proactive compliance. A further incorrect approach of only informing senior management without involving legal and compliance departments is problematic. While senior management needs to be aware of significant developments, their primary role is not regulatory interpretation. Bypassing the specialized expertise of legal and compliance means that the critical assessment of whether the information constitutes inside information and the appropriate steps for its management are not being conducted by those best equipped to do so, increasing the risk of regulatory noncompliance. A professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's internal policies and procedures regarding the handling of potentially market-sensitive information. When faced with such a situation, the first step should always be to consult with the designated compliance or legal department. This ensures that the information is assessed against the relevant regulatory definitions, e.g., what constitutes inside information under applicable laws, and that appropriate protocols are followed before any further dissemination or action is taken. This structured approach minimizes risk and upholds ethical and regulatory standards. Question 18. The assessment process reveals that a newly developed feature for a popular application, intended to personalize user content, has the potential to collect and process sensitive user data without explicit, granular consent for each data point. The development team is eager to launch the feature to meet competitive pressures. Option A. Launch the feature with a broad, general privacy policy update that covers the new data processing activities, without seeking specific consent for the sensitive data collected. Option B. Proceed with the launch of the feature as planned, assuming users will implicitly consent by continuing to use the application and address any privacy concerns that arise post-launch. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before launch and implement mechanisms for granular user consent. Option D. Defer the launch of the feature until a later date, without conducting any specific privacy assessment, to avoid delaying the competitive release. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before launch and implement mechanisms for granular user consent. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a scenario where a new product feature, designed to enhance user experience, has an unforeseen impact on data privacy. This is professionally challenging because it requires balancing innovation with a fundamental obligation to protect user data, a core tenet of responsible technology development. The pressure to launch new features quickly can sometimes overshadow thorough risk assessment, creating a tension between business objectives and compliance requirements. Careful judgment is needed to identify potential harms before they materialize and to implement appropriate safeguards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment methodology. This involves identifying potential data privacy risks associated with the new feature, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and then developing mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, which are embedded in modern privacy regulations. By conducting a thorough assessment, the team can ensure that the feature is launched in a manner that respects user privacy and complies with all applicable laws, thereby building trust and avoiding potential legal and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical implementation without considering the data privacy implications is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This demonstrates a disregard for the fundamental right to privacy and a failure to adhere to data protection principles. Such an approach could lead to breaches of data protection laws, resulting in substantial fines, legal action, and severe reputational harm. Another incorrect approach that relies on post-launch incident response rather than pre-launch assessment is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive stance indicates a lack of foresight and a failure to uphold the duty of care owed to users. It suggests a willingness to accept potential harm and deal with the consequences later, which is contrary to ethical conduct and regulatory expectations for responsible data handling. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment into the entire product development lifecycle. This involves establishing clear data privacy requirements early on, conducting regular privacy impact assessments, involving privacy experts in design and development, and implementing robust testing procedures that specifically look for privacy vulnerabilities. When faced with potential conflicts between feature development and privacy, the framework should mandate a pause to address the risks, rather than proceeding with the launch. This ensures that innovation is pursued responsibly and ethically. Question 19. Analysis of how to best approach a situation where a new product features potential security vulnerabilities are being assessed, and the initial risk assessment data appears to be heavily influenced by the development team's enthusiasm for the feature, potentially downplaying certain risks. Option A. Rely on the development team's self-assessment of risks, as they possess the most intimate knowledge of the feature's technical intricacies. Option B. Proceed with the initial risk assessment findings, assuming the development team's positive outlook reflects a thorough understanding of the feature's inherent security. Option C. Implement a multi-stage review process involving independent security experts and cross-functional teams to validate the initial findings and identify any overlooked or understated risks. Option D. Focus the risk assessment solely on the most obvious and easily quantifiable security risks, as these are typically the most critical. The correct answer is C. Implement a multi-stage review process involving independent security experts and cross-functional teams to validate the initial findings and identify any overlooked or understated risks. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to move beyond a superficial understanding of risk assessment and apply it to a nuanced situation involving potential conflicts of interest and the integrity of data. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient data analysis with the imperative to maintain objectivity and avoid bias, which are fundamental to sound risk assessment and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks that might not be immediately apparent. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the identification and mitigation of potential biases that could compromise the accuracy and reliability of the risk assessment. By proactively seeking diverse perspectives and employing independent validation, the individual adheres to principles of robust risk management and ethical conduct. This aligns with regulatory expectations that risk assessments should be objective, thorough, and free from undue influence, ensuring that decisions are based on sound analysis rather than potentially flawed assumptions or vested interests. An incorrect approach that involves relying solely on the initial data set without further scrutiny fails to acknowledge the inherent risks of data bias or incomplete information. This could lead to an inaccurate risk profile, potentially resulting in misallocated resources or missed opportunities to address critical vulnerabilities. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence. Another incorrect approach, which involves dismissing potential risks based on personal experience without objective validation, ignores the possibility of new or evolving threats. This can be a significant regulatory failure if it leads to noncompliance with risk management frameworks that mandate evidence-based assessments. Furthermore, an approach that focuses only on easily quantifiable risks while ignoring qualitative or emerging risks overlooks a crucial aspect of comprehensive risk assessment, potentially leaving the organization exposed to unforeseen threats. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to risk assessment. This includes clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential risks and their sources, evaluating the likelihood and impact of each risk, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Crucially, it necessitates a commitment to objectivity, seeking external validation where appropriate, and maintaining a critical perspective throughout the process. Professionals should always consider the potential for bias, both in the data and in their own judgment, and actively work to counteract it.